Welcome to the Sales Influence Podcast, where we talk about finding the why in how people buy. I'm your host, Victor Antonio. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for lending me your ears. And again, for those of you who subscribe to the Sales Velocity Academy, salesvelocityacademy.com, thank you very much. Give me some feedback on what you're learning, how you're using the content, and how you're closing more deals. Now, today I want to talk about, you ever been in that situation where you just get into an argument, or maybe it's just a strong disagreement? Now, in the past, when I used to get into these arguments or strong disagreements, my objective was always to try to win the argument, right? Try to prove my point. But age has taught me, it's tempered me a bit, to pull back a little bit and realize there's no point in trying to win an argument. Really, there's no point in trying to convince other people. So the best you can do in a conflicting conversation, the only thing you can control is to have an enlightening conversation. So how do you do that? Let's put ourselves in a scenario. You're talking to somebody, you're disagreeing with them, right? Now, I want you to be the adult in the room. I want you to be the enlightened being in the room. Because at the end of the day, the person that can show more restraint, be more reflective or thoughtful and aware is the person that's going to carry the day. But again, we can't control how people react to us, but we can control how we react to others. So, the next time you're having a disagreement with somebody, step number one, mentally pause. Just hit the pause button on your brain, let the other person keep talking, and really listen to understand. Don't listen to respond with something clever. Listen to understand. And then I want you to ask yourself 3 simple questions. In your head, you'll be able to do this quickly, because I do it all the time now. The first one is, what is the context of this conversation? Why are we disagreeing? Because sometimes it is the context that basically is where we're disagreeing. So, for example, if you're talking about a certain situation where you didn't close a deal because the boss said, we don't want this, well, what's the actual context there? The real context is, why didn't the boss want to go forward? Maybe they already know somebody who's already dealing with them. In other words, they have an incumbent that they have a relationship with. Maybe they simply didn't have the money. So in order not to argue about this conversation, I always ask, well, what's the context? Before we get deeper into this discussion, what is the context of your argument? By understanding the context, you almost put a frame around the discussion. When there is no context, there is no frame, which means we could be arguing about the same thing. We just keep missing each other. So if it is in context, then maybe it's definition. Ooh, that's a big one. Sometimes we're actually agreeing, we just don't agree on the definition. For example, we could have a discussion about success. Well, what's your definition of success? Now, we'll go back and forth. Is it about money? Is it about living your life? Is it about YOLO? You only live once. What is success? Well, this goes back to context. Who are we talking to? And what is the definition of success? So let us first agree on a definition, and then maybe if we agree on a definition, then maybe we can move the conversation forward. So that's a perfect example of first understanding the context, who you're talking to, and then definition. Well, what do you mean by that? So, for example, if you and I were having a discussion about success, I said, well, what does success mean to you? And you would give me your answer. I would give you mine, which is the ability to balance a good financial situation with enough time to enjoy life and your family and your friends. That, to me, is success. But I know people who just love to make money. That's their definition of success. Is it wrong? Of course it's not. It's their definition. But if we're going to argue about success, we first have to understand the context. Who are we talking to? And then let us come to an agreement on definition. And even if we disagree on the definition, that person says it's about money, I say it's about balance. Who's right? The answer is, who cares? The only person you care about is yourself. So even when you're in a conversation with customers, sometimes it's a matter of definition. When you're trying to sell a product or service and they want a certain return on investment, well, let's define what that means. Let's define how you quantify that. Let's define in what time frame would you measure that in. By defining things, we can actually have a more enlightened, if I can use the word again, conversation. Now, let's say that there's still a disagreement. We've settled on the context. We've settled on definitions, But now the third component in disagreements is that two people coming together for a discussion bring two sets of experiences to the conversation, each with their own set, right? This person brings their set, I bring my set. One of the conversations I get into when I talk about success, I come from a mindset of not a victim mentality, but a victor mentality, no pun intended. A victor mentality is one that says, yeah, of course there's obstacles. Of course there are going to be people put in my way to try to stop me. Of course there's going to be hard times. But you know what? You just got to keep going. Eventually, you'll overcome all these issues. That's a victor mindset. A victim mindset is to believe that society is against me. Nobody likes me. Nothing ever goes my way. I'm just not that smart. Nothing will ever change. It is what it is. That's a victim mindset. So two people having a discussion could bring two different mindsets. Now let's put this in the context of business. One salesperson can say it can be done because they come from a school of thought where it isn't about price. It's about value. It's about how you position your value. Another person, salesperson, comes from their side and they say, it is about price. Unless I give them a discount, I'm not going to win the deal. Two different experiences. Now, let me wrap this up for you so you get an idea of what I'm trying to transmit to you, because this is how you stop yourself from getting into arguments or having better discussions. That's our goal, to have better discussions. And step one is to understand the context. What are we talking about? Who are we talking about? What's the situation? Two, let's define definition. What do you mean by that term? What do you mean by that phrase? Initially, when you start doing that, defining context and defining definition, what begins to happen is you slow the conversation down. Because now the other person has to give you context. The other person has to define what they mean. Now, two things are going to happen. One, they're going to be able to do it rather quickly, give you the context and definition. Or what often happens is that the other person has no context and maybe isn't clear on their definition. Well, if that's the case, you know there's no point in arguing. When a person doesn't have context or understands definitions, then an argument's always going to ensue. So your job, again, is to be the adult in the room. Pull back, try to understand the context, try to understand the definitions. If you've gotten over those two hurdles, the last one to keep in mind is that everybody comes to any agreement or disagreement, any discussion, with their own set of experiences. So, for example, if you and I were disagreeing on price versus value, I would ask you, I said, why is it that you think that price is the only way to sell? I need to understand. And they're going to give you their understanding, hopefully with some context and some definition. And then I'm going to give them my opinion on selling on value, not on price. Now, we may not agree, but that's okay. It's always good. We've all heard the phrase, right? Let's agree to disagree. And what we're saying here is that when you're entering into a conversation, don't get into a conversation to try to win the conversation. If I can put a button on this thing, that's the goal. That's the end goal. The goal is not to win the conversation. The goal is to have a discussion so you both walk away from that conversation more enlightened, more aware, more open to somebody else's point of view, and, dare I say, a little smarter. Too often people go into a conversation, as I mentioned already, to try to win the conversation. When you do that, you basically lock yourself out of learning something new, because you know what? You may learn something new. You may understand or hear something that you go, I never thought about that. But always keep in mind that our disagreements have to do with context, have to do with definition, and a lot of times it has to do with our personal experiences, and you're not going to change that, so don't even try. Remember, the only attitude you can control is yours, and as I always say, attitude controls behavior, behavior controls your consequence. And let's end every conversation on a positive consequence note. And that is it for this Sales Influence podcast. Don't forget to leave me some feedback on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, even Spotify and Pandora now. Let me know what you think. I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, check out my online sales training platform, the Sales Velocity Academy. 50 courses, over 500 videos, my 13 books. Got a new one coming out soon. Check it out, salesvelocityacademy.com. If you want to learn how to sell more, faster, check it out. Lastly, I want to remind you, this is Victor Antonio, always reminding you, selling ain't hard when you know how. Take care. Hi, I'm Victor Antonio. I'm an author, sales trainer, and keynote speaker.
I'm often asked, what makes a great speaker? Is it someone who delivers real content that the audience can use? Is it someone who engages the audience so they're part of the learning experience? Or is it someone who can motivate an audience to push them beyond their comfort zone and discover new abilities? The answer is yes. But the most important thing to remember is that I'm not there to look good. I'm there to make my client look good. Simply put, it's never about me, and it's always about them.